The wedding was meant to be a fairy tale, white roses, soft music, a bride trembling with joy. But when engines thundered outside the church, whispers turned to fear. Guests froze as leather-clad bikers filed in. Then, against every expectation, one moment silenced the room and changed the story forever. Before we start today's story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Also, please subscribe to the channel. It will help us to bring you more inspiring stories every day. The morning sun spilled over Maple Ridge Church, its stained glass glowing with color. Inside, Sofia Hayes paced nervously, smoothing the lace of her gown. It was her wedding day, but joy twisted with nerves in her chest. Her groom, Daniel, waited patiently at the altar, practicing deep breaths of his own. Guests filled the pews, neighbors, co-workers, distant cousins, all dressed in their Sunday best. The air buzzed with chatter and music from the string quartet, yet beneath the surface there was tension. Rumors had spread that Daniel's distant cousin Ryder might show up, with his motorcycle club. Some whispered the word bikers like it was a curse, their faces pinched with judgment. Sofia tried to focus on the joy ahead, but unease tugged at the back of her mind. Her grandmother, fragile and in a wheelchair, sat waiting in the back. "I'll get you to the front somehow," Sofia had promised. She didn't know yet. Help would arrive in a way no one expected. Just as the first notes of the wedding march began, the sound hit. Low at first, then swelling into a roar. Engines, dozens of them. Heads whipped toward the doors. The music faltered. Whispers rushed like wind through the pews. They came. Oh, God. Outside, a convoy of Harleys rumbled into the church parking lot, chrome glinting in the sun. Black leather vests flashed red and white patches, tattoos stretching over arms that looked like they'd wrestled storms. Guests shifted nervously, mothers clutching their children closer. An usher muttered, "This is a wedding, not a bar fight." The church doors swung open. Ryder stepped in, broad-shouldered, his beard catching the light. Behind him a line of bikers filed in, boots heavy on the tile. All eyes turned to the bride waiting at the back. Sofia froze, her heart hammering. She had begged Ryder not to make a scene, but the scene that followed wasn't destruction. It was something no one could have imagined. The murmurs grew louder as the bikers entered. "Look at them. Leather and chains at a wedding? What are they doing here?" Sofia's cheeks burned. She knew Ryder wasn't dangerous, rough, yes, but loyal. Still, judgment weighed heavy. Guests saw only the patches, not the people. At the back, Grandma Rose struggled in her chair, wheels catching against the carpet. Sofia rushed to her side, lifting her dress to crouch low. "I'll help, Grandma." "Just hold on." But the crowd's disapproval thickened, and Aunt shook her head. This is what happens when you invite trouble. Then boots thudded softly behind her. Sofia looked up to see Ryder standing tall, his expression unreadable. He glanced at her, then at the fragile woman struggling to move forward. Without a word, he bent down, his massive hands surprisingly gentle as he took hold of the chair. Another biker stepped in to help, steadying it. Gasps rippled through the church. The feared men weren't bringing chaos, they were carrying love. The room hushed as Ryder and another rider lifted Grandma Rose's chair, careful and steady. Their tattoos flexed with the effort, but their movements were reverent, almost ceremonial. Step by step they carried her down the aisle. The string quartet, unsure, began playing again, but softer now, as though underscoring something holy. Sofia pressed her hands to her mouth, tears stinging her eyes. Daniel, waiting at the altar, straightened with awe. Even the most skeptical guests couldn't deny the sight. Two men everyone feared treating a frail grandmother with more dignity than anyone else had offered. Rose, eyes glistening, patted Ryder's arm. "Thank you, son," she whispered. His voice rumbled low. "Family takes care of family." The bikers set her gently at the front, positioning her so she had the best view of the ceremony. Silence lingered, heavy with realization. Judgments cracked, replaced by something new, respect. The wedding was no longer just about vows between bride and groom. It had become about something larger. The ceremony continued, but the air was different. Guests who had whispered fear now leaned forward, eyes softening. Children peeked curiously at the bikers lined along the back, who stood quietly, hands folded, heads bowed during prayer. Sofia walked down the aisle, her father at her side, but her gaze kept drifting to the front row, where Grandma Rose sat smiling proudly, thanks to the very men everyone had feared. At the vows, Daniel's voice cracked, overcome with emotion. He glanced at Ryder, then back to Sofia. "Today isn't just about us," he said softly. "It's about every person who shows what love looks like, even in unexpected ways." Applause erupted when the couple kissed, louder than most weddings dared. Guests turned, some even shaking hands with the bikers they had once avoided. And when the newlyweds walked back down the aisle, Ryder and his brothers stepped aside in unison, forming an honor guard of leather and steel. The fear was gone. In its place stood awe. After the ceremony, guests spilled into the reception hall, still buzzing from what they had witnessed. Chandeliers glowed above white tablecloths and vases of roses, but the real focus was on the leather-clad men posted at the edges of the room. Some guests whispered nervously, "They'll drink too much. This will end in a fight." Others shook their heads, recalling the sight of Grandma Rose being carried with such care. Doubt and fear clashed with respect. At a corner table, Rose laughed softly, enjoying more conversation than she had in years. Ryder stayed near her, watching like a guard. His brothers mingled quietly, surprising everyone by lining up politely at the buffet. Sofia watched it all with Daniel at her side. "They don't see it yet," she murmured. "But I do." Daniel kissed her temple. "They'll learn. Actions speak louder than fears." And as the night wore on, that truth would prove itself again, louder than any whisper. The band struck up a lively tune, coaxing guests onto the dance floor. Children twirled in suits and dresses, laughter cutting through lingering tension. At first, no biker moved. They stood back, arms crossed, watching with faint smiles. Then Rose tapped Ryder's arm. "Go on," she teased. "Show them you're not just boots and beards." Ryder chuckled, then stepped forward. He offered his hand to Sofia. Gasps rippled, but Sofia accepted, her lace sleeve trembling in his grip. The room held its breath as he led her into a slow, careful spin, nothing flashy, just respectful. Daniel joined, clapping Ryder on the shoulder. Soon more bikers followed, dancing awkwardly but earnestly with children, cousins, even a few brave aunts. Laughter erupted, the tension dissolving at last. Guests who had feared fists now saw only men honoring love in their own way. Sofia's tears sparkled as she whispered to Daniel, "This is the wedding I dreamed of. Love bigger than fear." And the music swelled, carrying the message across the room. Later, glasses clinked as Daniel's best man rose for his toast. He cracked jokes, offered kind words, then raised his glass. "To Sofia and Daniel, may your love outshine every storm." Applause followed, but it wasn't the final toast of the night. Steelhand, Ryder's longtime friend, stood slowly. His leather vest gleamed under the lights, silence falling at once. "People fear us because of patches," he said, voice gravel but steady. "But patches don't make a man. Actions do." He looked at Rose, then at Sofia and Daniel. "Today we carried more than a chair. We carried respect for family, for vows, for love. That's what matters." Glasses lifted hesitantly at first, then higher. The toast echoed stronger than the first, bridging worlds that had seemed divided. Sofia gripped Daniel's hand tightly, her heart bursting with gratitude. For the first time, the room wasn't guests and bikers. It was one family joined by love. Dinner flowed with surprising ease. The bikers took their seats respectfully, plates piled high but manners intact. They laughed with children, traded stories with uncles, even complimented the bride's cousins on their dresses. Rose sat at the head table, glowing with pride. She kept pointing to Ryder, telling anyone who'd listen, "That man made my day possible." Ryder only shook his head, embarrassed, but the twinkle in his eyes betrayed his pride. Sofia floated from table to table, her dress trailing like a dream. Everywhere she went, she saw barriers falling, guests leaning closer, smiles blooming where suspicion once reigned. At one table, Derek, a skeptical neighbor, finally muttered, "Guess I judged too fast." His wife nodded. Clinking her glass, Daniel squeezed Sofia's hand. "See? They're learning." By the time dessert arrived, the hall felt transformed. No longer divided, no longer tense. It wasn't just a reception anymore. It was proof that love, when shown, was louder than fear. As the night drew to a close, lanterns glowed outside, casting golden halos across the parking lot. Engines waited quietly, a reminder of the thunder that had once sparked fear. Sofia stood at the doorway, watching her guests leave. Instead of whispers, she heard laughter. Instead of fear, gratitude. Many stopped to shake Ryder's hand, thanking him for what he'd done. Rose, wrapped in a shawl, smiled up at her granddaughter. "I never thought I'd be carried to my seat by angels," she said with a wink. Sofia kissed her cheek. The best kind of angels. Daniel slipped an arm around her waist, whispering, "We wanted a wedding people would remember. I think we got it." The convoy fired up at last, engines rumbling like a promise. Guests waved as the bikers rode off, not as intruders, but as protectors of the day. And in every heart one truth lingered. Sometimes, the loudest love comes from the most unexpected places. Sunlight streamed through the hotel window as Sofia stirred awake. Her gown now folded carefully over a chair. Daniel kissed her forehead, smiling. "We did it," he whispered. Downstairs, guests crowded the breakfast hall, buzzing with conversation. Yet unlike most weddings, the talk wasn't about the flowers, the food, or even the vows. It was about the bikers. "I never expected that," one uncle said. "They were gentlemen." "They carried Rose like she was royalty," another added. Sofia entered the room to smiles, hugs, and gratitude. For years she had worried that Ryder's world would never be accepted by her family. But the wedding had changed something. When Rose rolled in, still glowing with joy, applause filled the hall. "Best wedding I've ever seen," she declared proudly. Sofia squeezed Daniel's hand. The ceremony was over, but its meaning was still rippling outward. What began in fear had ended in respect, and it was only the beginning. By Monday, the story had spread beyond the wedding guests. In Maple Ridge, nothing traveled faster than gossip, and now even the grocery clerk and postman were talking. "Did you hear about the angels at the Hayes wedding?" They carried the bride's grandmother to her seat. The tale grew with each telling, but the core never changed. Men who looked feared had revealed hearts of gold. At the diner, locals who once crossed the street to avoid Ryder now nodded in respect. Some even offered a handshake. Children whispered excitedly when bikes rumbled past, tugging their parents' sleeves. Sofia overheard one woman say softly, "Maybe we judged too quickly. Maybe they're more than patches and noise." Daniel smiled when he caught Sofia's eye. "See? People are learning." And Ryder, though still gruff and quiet, walked through town with a new kind of presence, not as a threat, not as an outcast, but as a reminder that love, when lived out loud, changes everything. One evening, Sofia visited her grandmother, who sat knitting by the window. The yarn glowed golden in the sunset light. "Grandma," Sofia said softly, "I'll never forget how they carried you down the aisle." "It meant everything." Rose chuckled, her hands pausing on the needles. "Child, I've lived long enough to know people are often more than they seem. Those men may look like thunderclouds, but inside, some carry sunshine." She leaned closer, her eyes shining. "The world judged them by leather and patches. But I felt their hearts in that moment, gentle, strong, pure." Sofia's throat tightened. "You think people will really change their minds?" Rose nodded. "Change comes one act at a time, and what they did that day. It was more than kindness. It was a lesson. Sofia hugged her tightly, overwhelmed by gratitude. Sometimes wisdom doesn't come in grand speeches. It comes in moments, like a grandmother's smile carried with honor by men the world feared. A week later, a line of Harleys rolled slowly into Maple Ridge, engines echoing against storefronts. People paused mid-step, hearts quickening. But this time fear didn't come first. Curiosity did. Ryder and a few of his brothers stopped at Rose's home. They carried in groceries, stacked firewood by the porch, even fixed the squeaky front gate. Rose sat watching from her chair, laughing like a child at their antics. Neighbors peeked over fences, expecting chaos, but what they saw was care. Sofia arrived just in time to catch Ryder gently adjusting Rose's shawl. "Told you, ma'am," he said gruffly. "Family looks after family." Rose clasped his hand. "And now you're part of mine." The word struck deep, echoing louder than any gossip. By the time the bikers left, people stood on porches waving. What once sparked whispers of fear now drew nods of respect. Sometimes acceptance doesn't arrive in speeches. It rumbles in on two wheels, carrying love in its wake. Months later, people still talked about that wedding, not because of the flowers or the dress or even the vows, but because of the moment that silenced fear and revealed love. At a cafe downtown, someone remarked, "I've been to 100 weddings, but that one, that was different. That was unforgettable." Sofia and Daniel often heard the same. Every time Sofia smiled. It wasn't just our wedding. It was everyone's lesson. Rose kept a framed photo on her nightstand, the moment Ryder and another biker carried her chair down the aisle. Visitors always stopped to stare. Some cried, "Why do you keep that one?" Sofia once asked. Rose touched the glass gently. "Because it reminds me that love comes from the most unexpected places. And because it reminds everyone else too." The world had judged leather and engines as something to fear. But one wedding in Maple Ridge rewrote that story forever, and it began with a simple act of kindness. Weeks passed, but the impact of that single wedding day rippled through Maple Ridge like waves after a storm. At the grocery store, people who once avoided Ryder now greeted him warmly. At church, whispers no longer carried fear but curiosity. Children waved at the roar of engines instead of shrinking away. Sofia noticed it most when she walked with Daniel downtown. "Do you hear it?" she asked. "Hear what?" he said. "The difference," she whispered. No more fear in their voices. Rose, bundled in her shawl, rolled beside them, nodding in agreement. "Respect," she said firmly. "That's what they earned. Not by words, but by deeds." And slowly the town began to change. The leather patches that once looked like warnings now seemed like symbols of loyalty and care. People finally realized what Sofia and Rose had known all along. Sometimes the loudest hearts beat. Beneath the roughest exteriors, the wedding had been a vow not just for two lives, but for an entire community. But not everyone welcomed the change. One evening, as Ryder walked Rose home, a man across the street spat. "Angels don't belong here. They'll bring nothing but trouble." Sofia froze at the words, fear creeping back. Old prejudices die hard, and she worried the fragile trust might shatter. But Ryder didn't react with anger. He simply nodded, steady and calm. "Maybe you'll see us different one day," he said, guiding Rose gently up the steps. Rose patted his hand. "Don't you let their words cut you, son. I've lived long enough to know people cling to fear because it's easier than trust." Sofia exhaled, realizing Ryder's restraint was its own kind of strength. The wedding had been a beginning, not an end. Change would take time and courage. But with every act of kindness, the wall between judgment and acceptance grew thinner. And Ryder knew respect wasn't demanded. It was earned, one action at a time. A month later, Sofia and Daniel hosted a small family gathering to celebrate Rose's birthday. The cake glowed with candles, laughter echoing across the yard. Then came the rumble, steady, familiar, powerful. Neighbors rushed to porches as a convoy of Harleys pulled up, headlights slicing the dusk. Ryder led the group, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers strapped to his bike. The angels dismounted, surrounding Rose like guardians. One by one they approached her chair, each placing a flower in her lap. Rose's eyes filled with tears. "I've never felt so honored in my life," she whispered. The neighbors who had doubted them watched in silence. They saw men once feared bowing their heads to a grandmother's smile. Sofia captured the moment in her heart forever, the roar of engines quieted by tenderness, the patches softened by respect. That night Rose declared, "These men are my angels," in every sense, and for the first time the whole street seemed to believe her. Time passed, but the story of that wedding never faded. Photos circulated online, shared by strangers who had witnessed the moment. Two bikers, carrying a frail grandmother down the aisle with reverence. "It was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," one caption. Reed, Sofia, and Daniel found themselves stopped in town by people wanting to talk, not about the flowers, the dress, or the menu, but about the love they had witnessed. Rose cherished the photo of herself in Ryder's arms, telling anyone who asked, "That's what family looks like, and Ryder?" He never sought praise, never asked for thanks. But every time he rode through Maple Ridge, heads turned differently now, not with fear but with respect. The legacy of that day wasn't written in vows or rings alone. It was written in leather, steel, and the unexpected softness of men the world had misunderstood. A legacy that would outlast the wedding itself. On their first anniversary, Sofia and Daniel returned to the same church hand in hand. The stained glass glowed, just as it had a year before. But the memory that lingered strongest wasn't their kiss or the flowers. It was the sound of boots carrying Rose to her seat. As they stood together, Sofia whispered, "That day taught me something. Love isn't always quiet. Sometimes it roars in on two wheels and surprises everyone." Daniel smiled, pulling her close. "And sometimes love changes more than two lives. It changes an entire town." Outside, engines rumbled faintly in the distance like a promise still alive. Sofia closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her. The wedding had begun in whispers of fear, but it ended in applause, in tears, in respect, and its truth remained. Carried like thunder through Maple Ridge, that love, when lived boldly, will always be louder than fear. At first, they feared the roar of engines. But on that wedding day, the Hells Angels carried more than a chair. They carried love, respect, and a grandmother's smile. Some stories remind us that kindness breaks every barrier. If this touched your heart, like, subscribe, and press the bell icon for more unforgettable journeys.